Hello, fellas and felleries. Smiling Sam Alvey here. Karate combat champion, heavyweight champion, UFC veteran. I've been around the block a time or two, and I want to talk fighter pay. What goes into the contracts, where we are getting screwed, if we're getting screwed, and where the UFC really excels as far as, the payment of its fighters go. I know it is a very hot topic with MMA fans. They all want me to get paid more, and I am thrilled with that because of them constantly complaining and bitching about how little we get paid. I got paid a lot. A lot of the fighters do get paid a lot. Maybe not as much as Dana White is talking about, but we get paid pretty well. So I'm going to take this video. I'm just going to break down the Vivek Ramaswamy and Dana White interview. I'm going to go point by point and just tell you what I know from behind the scenes, what contracts I've signed, how I signed them, how they were presented to me, and how I had to live up to them. And with that, let's get going.
The fighters are not employees, right? They're
Right.
kind of
independent
partners,
contractors.
contractors.
Independent contractors.
How do you decide? You still decide how much they're paid, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and how do you think about that?
So the way that it works is, there's a, I guess you'd call it a standard level of pay.
Uh-huh.
And depending on who you are and how you make it, how you climb up the ladder. So what happens is when you become a world champion, you become a partner.
Okay.
So when you got the belt, you share in the pay-per-view revenue.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So when you can actually become effectively a revenue partner in the
100%.
business after you work your way into that.
Once you win the title, you become a
I
partner.
don't know if there's another professional sport that I think actually does that. It's true. I can't. Football doesn't. Basketball doesn't.
Well,
Baseball
boxing
doesn't.
does.
Boxing. Okay. Okay. All right.
Boxing does.
But those are one-time matches. But it's
Yeah.
different here where it actually has permanent enterprise value.
And whoever is the champion in boxing, you get the lion's share of the revenue. Here, it's dispersed across everybody. We got a guy right now who's 49 years old. No, I'm sorry, 40 years old. And he's on this hot streak, man. And his name's Jim Miller. And
Okay.
he's been around forever. He's been around since we bought the company. And he's still fighting. And he's on this hot streak right now. He's going to fight on UFC 300. And this is a guy who's been, I guess you could call him a journeyman in boxing, right?
Okay.
If you asked most people, they wouldn't know who Jim Miller is. And the guy's made millions of dollars.
Good for him doing
Yeah,
this.
100%.
And he participates as a partner?
No.
He's not even in
No.
that level.
He's never
Wow.
made it to that level.
And he's already and still will take millions from doing it.
So the money is dispersed.
Yeah.
Guys that would be considered journeymen in boxing never make that kind of money.
What do you think is different about this? It's more that it's not a one-time deal. It's the fact that
No,
it
it's
keeps
because
going,
what we
right?
do
You
is
got the brand.
we focus on building great fights with great fighters.
Yeah.
And if you can stay here for a certain amount of time, you make really good money. You know, you can support your family, you can pay your house off, you can, you're not going to be, you're not going to have 30, 40 million dollars, but you'll have 6, 7, 8 million.
All right. So the first thing they were talking about there was we are independent contractors. A lot of people think we are employed by the UFC. We are not. We are independent contractors. We are paid by the UFC to show up and do a job. We have a contract with the UFC, and this is the part a lot of people also don't know, is the contract is completely sided with the UFC. I do not get a say in the contract for the most part. There are negotiations, of course, but once that contract was signed, at least with me, and I was a good journeyman. I made it to top 10, never title contention, but I made it to top 10. I signed a lot of contracts with them. They would present the contract, and I would either sign it or say I want to hold off one. Most contracts are 4 fights, at least for the journeyman like me, like most of the UFC. You'll get a 4-fight contract. After the 3rd fight, you are allowed to renegotiate. They encourage you to renegotiate. A lot of times the UFC just comes to me and says, hey, Sam, if you sign now, we'll give you X amount more. Don't worry about the 4th one. There are some fighters out there. I believe Anthony Pettis was one. He never signed on the 3rd fight. He always fought his 4th fight and then asked for a lot more at the end of that. Me, I always signed the 3rd one. My wife and I did all the math. My wife, more than I, did all the math, and we made so much more money just signing on the 3rd contract, not fighting out. And the reason you might want to fight it, fight the full contract out, is at the end of your contract, you're a free agent. You can negotiate with whoever you want and then use them against the UFC. I didn't want to fight anywhere else. I was thrilled with UFC. I never wanted to do that, and I was happy with what the UFC was doing with me. And so that's where I stayed. Some fighters, not a lot, some fighters, those creme de la creme of the fighters, the champions, or the close to champions, they hold out. So then they say, well, PFL's offering me this, ONE FC's offering me that, Bare Knuckles offering me this, and they go that route. I know right now Mike Perry is big into UFC couldn't afford me. Good for him. He's made a life for himself in bare knuckle, and that is fantastic news. I really am proud of what he's been able to do. But the contracts, now this part's the important part. The contracts are sided with the UFC. At any point, the UFC can void the contract, cancel it, and fire me. At any point. So if it's a 4-fight contract, I win 3 fights, but they're boring. They say, we don't want you anymore, you're gone. They can cut me. If I win 3 fights and they love me, they can either offer me a new contract or they don't have to offer me anything. If I lose, like most UFC fighters do, they lose 2 and they're cut, they can just cut you right there. They don't need to let you fight out the 4th contract. I had, towards the end of my career, I had the 4th fight on my contract. I lost it. And I was devastated. So, well, okay. No, excuse me. It was the 3rd fight on my contract. Devastated. I was sure they were going to cut me. So I talked to Mick. He said, Mick, just let me fight out my contract. I got 1 more fight. He said, Sam, no, we'll do one better. Here's the new contract. And they gave me a new contract right then and there. And although I was on a skid, it went up about $20,000 in each end. I was like, holy God. My last contract with UFC was for $95.95. And that was on a skid. And it went up about $20,000 on each end of the contract going into that last contract. I could not have been happier with them. I was just thrilled with everything, and I wasn't expecting it. But that's how the contracts work. In the beginning of the UFC, you sign typically, when I was there, typically the contract was 8-8, and then you get $3,000 on each end, show and win money. You show up, you get X amount. If you win, you get a win bonus. You get typically double. Some, depending on the contract, it might be various. When I signed, it was 8-8. I lost the first one, so my next fight was 8-8. I won that one with an awesome knockout and went up to, 11-11. And then I won that one. And that was my 3rd fight. They renegotiated me. So instead of putting me up at, what would that have been, 14-14, they actually gave me a big one. I jumped over to 30-30. It was like 32-32. Same 3,000 on each end. And that's the way the UFC structures it. Most fighters at the beginning start around 8-8 when I was starting. Right now, the base pay is $12,000, 12-12. If you come over from some other super great league, like I'm sure MVP is not making 12-12. I'm sure MVP Michael Venom Page is making a lot of money to make the jump from the PFL, from Bellator to the UFC. Alex Pereira probably got a big bump in pay coming over from whatever kickboxing he was in. So there are things you can do outside of the UFC to make your base pay go way up. But most people start around 12-12.
Guys that would be considered journeymen in boxing never make that kind of money.
Now, this was a big point in the interview, talking about the boxing fights. And a lot of UFC fans complain about, well, the boxers make this much, they make so much more. And it's true. Tyson Fury has made more in boxing than any champion in UFC has ever made, probably total. In one boxing fight, Tyson Fury has made more than any UFC champion combined, probably. But if you are on the undercard in boxing, you are making nothing. If you are the headliner, maybe the co-main event, you're making some good money. If you are the undercard fighter, you are making nothing. So comparing the UFC to boxing is not a fair comparison. The champion makes what they make. UFC spreads it out. UFC lets it trickle down. You might tune into the card to watch Conor McGregor or John Jones fight, but because they're fighting so successfully, because you're paying to watch it, which is a good reason to not just stream the fights for free, but to pay for them, because you're paying to watch those fighters fight, it trickles down to the first fight on the card, 12-12. A lot of boxers, if you're on the undercard, you are not making 12-12. You are making 3-3, 2-2, 6-6. You are making a lot less trying to become the next Tyson Fury, trying to become that next Ryan Garcia, that next headliner of boxing events. And that's one of the things. Everyone that complains online about UFC pay is terrible, I get you. And I appreciate you wanting us to make more. I really do. The free market is taking care of that. PFL is stepping their game up. One Championship is doing the same thing. Bare knuckle boxing, karate combat, they are all paying more money, so us fighters have more options. And we can pit organizations against each other. My next contract with karate combat, I'm looking forward to seeing everything. But I also know if they don't want me anymore, PFL will. I've got a big fan base. I'm a very talented fighter, and I'm now the heavyweight champion of the world. I've been talking to them. They want me back. I'm looking forward to defending this belt forevermore. I'm going to retire the champion. It's going to happen 20 years from now. But that's one of the big things that typical fans don't understand. Boxing headliners make a lot of money. UFC headliners make a lot of money, but not nearly like the boxing. But the rest of the card, all 800 or whatever number of fighters the UFC has, makes decent money because of what the headliners draw in, bring in. So if you're just, bragging about, I stream every fight, pay the fight. You're not just paying to watch John Jones. You're not just paying to watch Sean Strickland. You're paying the entire card. Now, Jim Miller as a journeyman, he absolutely is. He is the best journeyman that's ever been, and he is maybe now closer to a title shot than he's ever been. I think he's 40 years old. It's ridiculous what he's been able to accomplish. 36 or 37 fights. I had 25 fights in the UFC. That isn't done. That is, people don't get to 25 fights. I believe I have more fights in the UFC than John Jones does. Now, he's the champion, so he doesn't fight nearly as much as I did, but he doesn't have to fight nearly as much as I did. But to get to 25 is impressive. To get to 37, I can't even imagine that. He's been around since before Dana White was around. And so I'm sure he is making big chunks of money every time he fights. He has got a name. He's got a style about him. He's a very exciting fighter. People tune in to watch Jim Miller. And now because he is this legend of the sport who's still around, he's got to be the oldest remaining fighter. It's like him and Jason Clay Guida. Those are the two guys that have been around. They're making bank. Now they're talking about he may never make millions of dollars per fight, but he has made millions of dollars over his career. That's true. He probably has. I know what I've made. My entire fight earnings, I'd have to do the math, but it just cleared $1 million. It just did. I am by no means, I don't have any of it left because you still have to live, you still have to pay. I've got a ranch and a family and this and that, so I'm stuck working the rest of my life. But Jim Miller, he may not. I'm sure he's got his gym, he's got his side hustles and stuff, but he's been around for a long time, making a lot of money for a long time. He's a guy who belongs on UFC 300. I'd like to see him in the main card even. I doubt he will be. I would like to see him get honored with that. But fighters like him can make a lot of money. Guys that have never been in title contention but have been energetic, entertaining, and always game to fight, always ready for that next fight. And then they fight and they show up and they put on the good fights. They don't win all of them. They win a lot of them. They win the ones that matter. They win the fights that get them to their next contract. And I got a $15,000 or $20,000 boost off my contract coming off a 3-fight skid. Lord knows what he got, and I don't think he's ever had a 3-fight skid. He has been just top notch and been able to do really, really well. However, now this is kind of the part where I disagree with Dana White.
You can support your family. You can pay your house off. You can, you're not going to be, you're not going to have $30-40 million, but you'll have $6, $7, $8 million.
Dana White went on to talk about how, yes, if you're, a journeyman, you can make millions of dollars. You can get to that $6, $7, $8 million. It's like, no, I don't see how it's possible. Like I said, I've had 25 fights in the UFC. I understand I was a journeyman in there. I took a lot of fights I shouldn't have taken, a lot of short notice fights. It is what it is. I'm not blaming anything, but I stepped up when needed. And I kind of paid for it at the end. I got a bunch of tough fights on short sleep. Most fighters never make it to 37 fights. Most fighters never make it to 25 fights. Most fighters make it to, I believe the stat is most people that get into the UFC are 2 or 3 fights and then cut. And then they go on to the next one. Most fighters don't make it to the 3rd or 4th contract. And so they never make the millions of dollars. Even the good ones. Even the guys that are around for that are talented and winning, they never make it to 37 fights. Most fighters take injuries, get hurt, and they just can't fight constantly. They can't fight forever. They're too broken. When we get hurt, the UFC does take care of us. They do fix us, but it's not something that we can rely on. It's not an income source that most of us will ever get. So if you were to look up every fighter that's made it to 25 fights, let's say, there's not many of us. If you were to look up every fighter that made it to 15 fights, there's more, but they're not millionaires. I don't know how many more fights I would have needed to have been a millionaire, to have had made $5, $6, $7 million like Jim Miller apparently has. Good for him. I mean, that is the dream. To be able to do what you love, make enough money to love and live the rest of your life, but maybe never have the pressure of a title shot. I mean, everyone wants a title. Everyone wants to fight for the millions of dollars right then and there, but they might not want the pressure of it. So he has a great life, a great gig, has had a great career, but the list of people that can brag about making millions of dollars in the UFC without a title around their waist is very limited. There are very few fighters that have done that. And once you lose that title, it's very hard to get it back, because now you're fighting for a lot less than you just were fighting for a pay-per-view percentage, and now you're not. And now you're kind of up against the wall. So, oh, I don't want to do this for a quarter of what I was making. Jim Miller never do that. He knew what he was fighting for. He knew he was going to fight for a year from now. He didn't have that pressure, and so good for him. If you have any questions you want me to answer, if you need a part 2 to this, put it in the comments. I'll do my best to read everything. I might answer it there. I might, if it's a good enough question, I'll answer it here on the page. If you're pro more fighter pay, if you're anti-fighter pay, if we get paid too much, too little, let me know that too. Tell me what you're thinking. This is as full an explanation as I can give as to what I was paid, how the UFC treated me, and all of that. That'll be another video I got to do, is just how the UFC treated me really well. But just explaining what goes into making it worth it. Like, I'll never be a millionaire. I've got a finger that'll never go straight again. I've got a limp. I've got a this. I've got a that. But I wouldn't change a thing in the world. I love what I do. I love what I did, and I look forward to doing more of it. Now with Karate Combat as their heavyweight champion. By the way, I've got news coming up about that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, put it in the comments. DM me. Let me know. Love you guys, and we'll talk to you soon.